Hello. Now we're going to talk about scarcity. Scarcity is probably the most basic concept in all of economics. And at the end of this discussion, I'm going to introduce you to a spiritual concept about scarcity that you may not have thought about. Scarcity is the most basic concept in all of economics. It occurs when the ingredients for producing things that people desire are insufficient to satisfy all of our wants. It means that we never have enough of everything, including time, to satisfy every one of our desires. That's scarcity. Scarcity is not a shortage. Scarcity is not the same thing as poverty. A shortage can be cured. Poverty can be remedied. Scarcity cannot. Let's talk about production. Production is any activity that results in the conversion of resources into products that can be used in consumption. So production would be making an automobile. Production could be making a ring binder. Production could be a lawyer providing legal advice, legal services. Resources, or factors of production, remember we talked about resources a little bit earlier, now we're going to define them a little bit more, are factors of production. These are the inputs that we use to produce the things that people want. Resources or factors of production can be categorized in 3 and sometimes 4 broad categories. One is land. Natural resources or gifts of nature. Timber would be a land resource. Gold would be a land resource. Dirt would be a land resource. Labor is the human resource. It's the number of hours required to plant corn, to harvest corn. That's labor. Capital is the 3rd category, and we can subcategorize capital into 2 areas, physical capital and human capital. Physical capital is all manufactured resources. For example, a shovel is physical capital. A plant to manufacture an automobile is physical capital. Human capital is different. Human capital is the accumulated training and education of all the workers. But it's different from what we talked about before here with labor. Remember, labor as a human resource is the number of hours required to produce something. Human capital is nothing more than the accumulated training and education of our workers. Now we get into a part that economists have a really hard time with, and that's this idea called entrepreneurship. It's a factor of production. It's a person who organizes, manages, assembles other resources. These are the risk takers. These are the makers of basic business policy decisions. These are the people who start businesses. When you think about it, the reason why economists have a hard time here is because we assume that people behave rationally. And yet, entrepreneurs are risk takers. They often do things, they risk their savings, their parents' savings, their home, their cars. They sell it all to follow a dream, to start a business. That doesn't seem particularly rational. And so economists have a hard time dealing with entrepreneurs. But nevertheless, this entrepreneurship is a resource. It's a resource in limited supply, and it's a factor of production that we need to consider. Let's talk about goods and services and goods and economic goods. Goods are things from which individuals derive satisfaction or happiness. Porsche is a beautiful automobile. It's a good. It's a thing that individuals who own Porsches seem to derive satisfaction and happiness from owning. Economic goods are scarce goods. They're things for which the quantity demanded exceeds the quantity supplied at 0 price. So anything that has a price of 0 and that has quantity demanded exceeding supply is considered an economic good. We won't deal with that definition very often in the course, but for economic purposes and to understand economics thoroughly, you'll need to understand it. What is a service? Service is a task that is performed for someone else. Lawyers provide services. Doctors provide services. Dentists provide services. These are often referred to as intangible goods. Where a good, as we discussed earlier, could be a Porsche, a service you can't put your hand around. You can't drive it. You can't carry it. It's hard to own. So it's considered an intangible good. Recall that scarcity occurs when the ingredients or resources for producing things that people desire are insufficient to satisfy all wants. Now we get into our needs and wants discussion, what we've already had a little bit earlier. To economists, the term need is not definable. Everybody's needs could be a little bit different. Wants, however, are definable. Wants are goods and services on which we place a positive value. We're willing to spend our money to obtain our wants. People have unlimited wants. Even Bill Gates has unlimited wants. The value of things that we want is called the opportunity cost. Now, we talked about scarcity as being one of the real pillars and foundation points of economics. Opportunity cost is one as well. The opportunity cost is always the value of the next best alternative that must be sacrificed to obtain something or satisfy a want. For example, you're currently listening to this video, taking an economics course. What is the opportunity cost of you doing that? What could you be doing if you weren't here? In other words, what would you be doing if you weren't sitting in front of your computer listening to this lecture? That's your opportunity cost. It's the highest valued, next best alternative that you're not doing that you would be doing if you weren't doing this. Does that make sense? So you're here watching this video. You could be surfing. And if you would be surfing if you weren't here, surfing is the opportunity cost. So, what's the opportunity cost of attending this course? What's the opportunity cost of attending a concert by your favorite band? What's the opportunity cost of increasing research for an AIDS vaccine? All of these things, the opportunity cost is the second best or next best alternative that you're not pursuing. Opportunity cost is always the foregone opportunity. Now we're going to summarize what we've talked about over the last two lectures. Number one, we have limited resources and unlimited wants. Economics is the study of how we deal with this dilemma. But because we have unlimited wants and limited resources, that creates a situation where we have scarcity. Scarcity requires choices. Choices, and the value of those choices, is defined by the opportunity cost. Now for a little spiritual Sunday school lesson. Scarcity is an interesting thing. Sometimes we translate our ideas of scarcity into a world that they don't belong. Scarcity is the operating characteristic of the economy of this world. However, it is not the operating characteristic of the eternal world or of God's economy. That operates under a completely different set of principles and rules. So where scarcity is the operating condition here, what is the operating condition on God's economy? It's not scarcity, it's abundance. And we behave differently under both conditions. In the case of scarcity, we consider that maybe God is a lot like a school teacher, meting out discipline for things we do or don't do. In the words of Joseph Smith, that clearly is not the God that he saw in the grove, nor is it the God that he believed in. The God that he believed in is a God of abundance, a God who is anxiously desiring and willing to give to his children. Doesn't sound like a God of scarcity, does it? Well, in our world of scarcity, we said land, labor, and capital are the determinants of production. In our world of abundance, there are three categories or three classifications of production as well. And those are faith, hope, and charity. So think about that as you go to your church service again on Sunday, and think about God's economy of abundance versus the world's economy of scarcity. And think about this quote by Joseph Smith. He said, The nearer we get to our Heavenly Father, the more that we realize that God is more boundless in His mercies and blessings than we are willing to believe or receive. Indeed, the more we become like our Heavenly Father, the more we realize that we want to take people's sins and throw them behind our backs and to take them upon our shoulders and carry them. He said, God does not look upon sin with the least degree of allowance, but He is willing and anxious to bless us and to have us be more like Him. That is the end of this chapter, and we will move on to the next chapter the next time we meet.